Okay. So, my cue, Leighton.
And I pass the torch to my magnificent colleague, Dr. Cynthia Nicol.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see you here, as Leighton said, on our last session of this series. My name is Cynthia Nicol, and I'm a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy, and I hold the chair for the David Robitaille Professorship in Math and Science Education. And yeah, it's an honor and pleasure to co-host this fourth session in our series, Reimagining Mathematics Education. I'd like to acknowledge that I am coming to you. Where's my acknowledge slide? Sorry, there it is. I'd like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Hunkaminam speaking people, right where the Fraser River splits. You can see this is the north arm of the Fraser River. And I am just really grateful to have spent so much time here in the last couple of years teaching from my home and being able to get to know this place better so that I can think about how I can continue to keep it in good health. So I think Leighton has already invited you to introduce yourselves and where you are coming from in the chat. I'm going to go back just a couple slides here to start us off with thinking about the supernatural Kangan Jad, who has been guiding us through these 4 sessions. This is Mouse Woman, and the design is by Billy Yovanovich. And you can see here the 2 helping hands, symmetrical with the eyes and the hands being guiding us with more than just our eyes and listening, and being able to think about balance and equity at the same time. And Billy says that this design helps us point us in a direction of good thinking towards mathematical adventures. We have, sorry, for some reason my slides are not in the order I want. Here's Billy here talking a little bit about Kangan Jad, and he says that Kangan Jad, like Mouse Woman, is sort of sneaky, just like math is, in the way that it's hiding in everything. And that she's always there, always helping, and sometimes you don't know why, but just like math, it's always there to help you out and finds a way to help you out. So I think it's a kind of beautiful way of thinking about Mouse Woman as a helper, but also thinking about mathematics as helping you out whenever you may not even expect it, but when it's there when you need it. So in today's session, we're going to focus on quite a new topic we're calling culturally responsive mathematics assessment. And we have a team here of people that you recognize because we've been in previous sessions before, Carol, Bob, and Hazelton, Joanne Yovanovich on Haida, Gwaii, and myself and Joanne Archibald, and Leighton from UBC, along with Janice Novakowski, also from UBC and the Richmond School District. And so we have just been kind of brainstorming some ideas around what culturally responsive mathematics assessment might be, could be, and we want to invite all of us together, including you, to help us kind of co-construct some ideas related to this new area that we're exploring. Another kind of mathematical adventure for us. So I'm going to pass it now to Joanne, who will talk a little bit about and give us an overview of the sessions that we've, that is on another slide. You're probably getting dizzy from all my back and forth slides here, sorry. This lists all the sessions that we've had so far. And this, we've had the teaching and learning math through place, Indigenous story work through math education, teaching math through social justice, and this final one, culturally responsive math assessment. And now Joanne is going to talk a little bit about some of the highlights through each of those sessions that leads us into thinking about culturally responsive math assessment. So Joanne.
Good, thanks, Cynthia.
Jump to the other slide. Sorry.
Sure, thanks. So, well, great. Oh, there, okay. So through this webinar series, we were fortunate, sorry, I'm too excited to get going, but Kwam Huyam Tasquich, also known as Kwam Kwam Huyam, and I join you today on the traditional unceded lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And this lovely picture of, the forest area is something we know well around this particular area of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. We were fortunate to have 13 excellent presenters for this webinar series who helped us reimagine mathematics education through examining the connections between math, community, and culture at diverse geographical, cultural, and educational contexts. So our first session was teaching and learning math through place and land. Next, please. I don't think I can do that. Good. So students found math in nature, such as spirals, and which they connected to Fibonacci numbers, and then they made their own spirals and other math learning that came about, as you can see in this next slide, in their playground. So they were outside a lot in their learning. Next. Math and stories are brought together within a community place, such as a local cafe, where students engaged in solving a math problem through creative storytelling, as you can see in this particular slide. Next. An experience in the forest brings up various math-related ideas along with observation and experiential activities. As you can see the questions here, and you get a sense of what some of the students were wondering about. And traditional Indigenous stories from different nations sparked math ideas through learning about where maple syrup comes from and doing some comparison. Then our next session was Indigenous story work and math education, where we looked at some of the 7 Indigenous story work principles. So I will share some of the highlights from the presentations that focused on one or more of these principles. Stories published by Indigenous authors were used to learn more about the 4 R's of respect, responsibility, reverence, and reciprocity. An Indigenous author and storyteller worked with the students to find math in his stories and his art. And then the students used the stories to portray their story of math learning. So story comes in different cycles here. Next. The Indigenous story work principle of reverence was part of the students getting ready to learn from stories that tree stumps might tell. That's quite interesting. What stories would tree stumps tell that are math? Then we go to Trickster the Raven, where lessons of reciprocity were emphasized. And the Trickster Raven helped the students connect the math learning and the story learning to about current day issues about changing to daylight saving time. Next. The principle of interrelatedness was experienced with students leading their multidimensional math learning using an Indigenous supernatural character from Haida Gwaii called Wasco. So they were both in the classroom and on the land. Then we moved to our third webinar session, which focused on teaching math for social and ecological justice. And some of the issues that the students learned more about and connected math to them related to homelessness, especially from the perspectives of those without a home, where students engaged in collaborative math problem solving. Then young students were engaged in math concepts such as measurement and and comparison in relation to a question of accessible parking. And from their learning, they took action and wrote a letter to the principal to have more accessible parking. Then we go to high school students, where they learned about the use of social media, such as TikTok, to bring together, social and ecological issues related to math inquiry and learning to present some of their ideas. Next. And various teaching and background resources were compiled using the theme of reconciliation as a place where teachers can begin their learning journeys where they can start their learning journey or continue their learning journey in relation to reconciliation and bring that together with math too. And so this leaves us to, where we are now. And as we reflect on what we've done over these past 3 sessions, I've offered, can you go back one? Offered some observations here, and these are just mine, and you might have different ones, but there is a strong connection between math, community, and culture. And I won't read what's on the slide. You can see where we have brought it together, and certainly math is everywhere. And that there were very exciting pedagogies that our 13 presenters used, and very experiential, combined with critical questions. Students worked together, even though they worked individually, but it was important that they learned from one another along with the teacher and community members. And that learning was certainly meaningful to the students and to the communities. And there was a high level of student engagement that the presenters shared, which then left further questions that maybe we didn't really examine that as deeply as we would like to in relation to assessment. So maybe these 2 questions are ones we can further think about and work together on in trying to align, the math, community, culture, epistemology way of knowing with the pedagogies, and then also looking at the evidence for the student learning in relation to this particular innovative approach. So that's a quick summary of where we've been with our webinar series.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. So just following from that very nice overview of the 3 different sessions and where we're kind of thinking now about what would it look like to think about culturally responsive assessment. And we can think about it quite linearly, like this. We teach something, then students learn it, and then we assess it. Just doot, doot, doot. And it looks really nice, clean, and simple. And I like that kind of diagram there too. But we know that that's, in reality, that doesn't happen, and it's very challenging. And if we're going to think differently about our practices and reimagine mathematics education through, as we've been talking about, learning from the land, thinking about land as teacher and place, thinking about Indigenous story work, and thinking about social justice, then that becomes even more complex. We could think about it maybe in more of a cycle or cyclical form, where we're teaching, we're learning, and then there's some kind of a feedback. But again, I think this is limiting because we know that it doesn't just happen in this kind of a cycle like this. And it started to get me thinking more about just rather than even the idea of assessment, calling it feedback. Like, what is it about feedback that allows us to respond in a way that will not only contribute to our community, like our classroom community of our own collective knowing, but also as individuals, how that would help us think about where we are and what more we need to learn, and how my learning contributes to your learning. So that kind of more holistic way of thinking about teaching and learning. So then it got me thinking about feedback loops in nature. And if you think about a feedback and we haven't been to any concerts recently, but remember way back when you're able to go to a concert and you might have some feedback from the speakers and the band playing, and that gets in the way. It's an obstacle. But we're trying to think of feedback more in terms of organic, more in terms of like an ecological system where you've got lots of different events, living and non-living, or lots of different populations, living and non-living, that are coming together and interacting in multiple different ways to be able to create this kind of healthy, vibrant, resilient community. So thinking about that in terms of assessment, what could it look like? So that's what we're going to hopefully think about together. So we could have different ways of different images of sort of thinking about teaching as, piling bricks from the bottom up so that students learn the various components and pieces and concepts and content that we build to make more proficient, stronger mathematical knower. We could think about it in terms of threads, and wool knots being threaded or braided. But if we think about that in the context of what are some principles that are guiding us in terms of teaching, then we can draw upon some recent work that I'm going to share a couple of slides on related to teaching. And then Carol will share some slides I'm thinking about related to assessment. So these are some principles that draw upon Sarah Florence Davidson and working with her dad, Robert Davidson, on Sk'ad'a Principles. And she talks about how learning emerges from strong relationships, authentic experiences, and curiosity, how learning occurs through observation, contribution, and recognizing and encouraging strengths, and how learning honors the power of the mind, history and story, and aspects of spirituality and protocol. So thinking about learning in that sense, what would teaching and learning look like together if we were to value these kinds of principles? We have also another model or framework that we could draw upon. This is called PAIRS, developed with myself and Joanne Archibald and Joanne Yovanovich. We called it PAIRS to stand for place, action, inquiry, relationships, and Indigenous story work. So asking questions around how teaching and learning connected to math and community and place could be grounded in place, how it provides opportunities for action towards change and making the world a better place, thinking about student inquiry and curiosity, building these strong relationships within community, within families, within our classrooms, and relationships with mathematics, and then thinking about being guided by Indigenous story work principles. So that can also be a set of guiding principles that we could draw upon to think about what would then feedback look like if we were trying to be guided by these principles of teaching and learning. And then finally, looking at some of the research that has been is ongoing in the area of culturally responsive teaching, not just in mathematics, but in general, indicates that we have emphasis on engaging learners in consciousness raising, embracing learners' culture as an asset, something to be used as a strength, considering students' personalized backgrounds, their funds of knowledge is another word that describes that, looking at students' identities and backgrounds and respecting that, focusing more than being respectful, empathetic, or sensitive, but also challenging. Lisa Delpit calls it being warm defenders, or demanders. So demanding from students something that pushes the level up, as well as being respectful, empathetic, and sensitive. So that leads to this idea of having high expectations and then making sure that those high expectations are realized. So that gives some ideas, some guiding principles, and some research that has focused on culturally responsive teaching. And Carol is going to now share some slides with us about thinking about what culturally responsive assessment might be. So this is the transition slide to thinking about that. So Carol, I'll pass it to you now.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. I am coming from, I'm an uninvited visitor in Nanaimo. And what I've been doing some background research on culturally responsive assessment. And what I really found is that it really is, like Cynthia discussed, that feedback loop where we're constantly teaching and learning together and giving feedback, not only is the student learning from us, but we're learning from them. And there's some awesome examples of efforts in community. These two are based in Hawaii, where culturally responsive assessment in Hawaii involves communities of people, including the Hawaiian State Department of Education, the University of Hawaii, and the Indigenous people. They work together to develop these assessments and for the K-12 Indigenous learners. And that's primarily to advance their culture and language. The Hawaiian language, so there was a Hawaiian language program developed. It's called, and I apologize if I'm saying these wrong, I don't speak Hawaiian, Klahapuni Assessment of Educational Outcomes, also known as Ka'io, and I apologize again if I'm not saying that correct. If we take a look at Ka'io, which it's a theoretical framework that is grounded in the principles of community assessment scores, and they're used to advance culture. If you can go back, I'm still on the other slide. Sorry. Thank you. If we work together to value and preserve, we strengthen our culture and empower our community. This will enable us to tell our story. Oh, sorry. You were right. I am on the next slide. Sorry. Okay, so the Ka'io has this theory of action, and that's what grounds the theoretical framework, is what grounds the principles of the community assessment and scores. And these scores are used to advance the culture and language, and this framework builds validity. So if we, in that little if we bubble, it basically says if we work together to value and preserve, we strengthen our culture and empower our community. And this will enable bubble basically says, this will enable us to tell our stories, values, and provide a guide for similar assessments for other Native communities. And with the final result being the advancement of Hawaiian wisdom that honors our past and future generations. So for me, this really just wraps up the Davidson's principles, Sk'ad'a. How do you say that? Sk'ad'a Principles?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That Cynthia mentioned, and the pairs.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So here are the Ha principles. So this is another framework developed with the Hawaiian community and the state of Hawaiian Department of Education. And really what it is it has 6 principles for interdependent learning for the entire K-12 curriculum. And that place learning is connected to place. So kind of like what you saw with Joy's pictures of the Forest Fridays, with her kids went out into the park and collected things and then told their stories. The performance of dutiful tasks is like the kids in the forest in the other story that we heard. I'm sorry, I don't remember that person's name. Proficiency, the skillful completion is like when Charlie Ray took her kids to the cafe and they had to guess the prices or what was this, do some thinking there. The other one is partnering, collaborative effort. So it's not just collaborative within the classroom, but it's collaborative with the parents, and it's a real sense of community, and then process just really honoring the culture, and which really aligns with culturally responsive teaching. And that's it.
Thank you, Carol. I really like these 6 Ps. Like, guess because there's 6 of them and they're all Ps. Besides that, they are, I think they hit at some of the aspects, and you drew from good examples across all of our 3 different sessions. And what's cool is that you came across this after all of these presentations. So there is some research out there that is focusing somewhat on getting at principles for thinking about culturally responsive assessment. And Carol, you've also created a spreadsheet that has a lot of the research, and you've annotated some of that you could that we can share with everybody who's interested in that at the end, right? Okay, good. So I think we've set a good stage to help us start to think about our own experiences and thinking about what culturally responsive assessment might look like. And I'm now going to invite Janice to set the stage for a little bit of sharing and work that we're going to do as co-constructing. Remember, I said that at the beginning, that we're going to work together, co-constructing some ideas based on our own experiences related to culturally responsive teaching and learning. So, Janice.
Thank you. So we are going to go into some breakout rooms with facilitated discussion and conversation around this emerging field of study, culturally responsive mathematics assessment. And I do a lot of work in school districts and in schools around assessment, and we have ministry language and district language that comes at us, like proficiency scales, et cetera. And we have to work within those constraints. But it's also, the whole point of this series is to reimagine mathematics education and thinking about opportunities for teaching and for learning, and to make connections to some of the things that we know about pedagogy and practice. And, we saw so many lovely stories, and Joanne summarized, so much of the sharing that has happened in this webinar series that have really focused on instructional practices. And we're moving our instructional practices in ways that are more holistic, are more connected to land and connected to community and culture. But our assessment practices aren't necessarily aligned with those pedagogical practices. And that's the question that has come up from participants in this series over the three other webinars that we've had. And so that's why, we've started researching this area and trying to generate some things like these principles that might inspire us in new ways to think about what assessment might look like. And one of the books that I often think about, it's published by the NCTM, but it's called Math is a Verb. And it draws upon mathematical teaching and learning across many cultures, and how in many indigenous languages in particular, math is expressed through verbing, that idea of doing, verbing, estimating, visualizing, etc. And I think we need to think about that as we think about our assessment practices as well. How do we assess the verbing of mathematics more holistically, more connected to students' personal experiences and identities and cultures? So on the next slide, we have, these are some photographs that I've actually taken. Oh, and I added another one, but it didn't show up. So I thought I updated the slide of the river here near where I live. And thinking of some of these images that might serve as a connection or a metaphor for you to inspire your breakout room discussions around culturally responsive mathematics assessment. Oh, there it is. There's the river by my home. So in our sort of working group, as we were thinking about this series, we thought about things like spirals as maybe a metaphor or an image that might help us think about assessment practices or feedback practices. We thought about, that metaphor or idea of weaving, and Cynthia mentioned that earlier about those threads coming together in different ways. And those are examples of student weavings with wool and with cedar, and student spirals with leaves outdoors. And then two images from at the top near where I live, near the river, and that idea of cycles. Is cycles maybe a metaphor or a connection for you in terms of seasonal cycles, tidal cycles, moon cycles, etc., cycles of the day? And then on the right, that idea of branching and rooting and fractals living in there. And maybe that's, a metaphor or an image that helps you think about assessment and feedback when we think about the teaching and learning of mathematics. So hold on to those images. Think about what resonates for you. So I know in our breakout room, the one that I was in, there was a group of 3 of us, and we all actually had similar district roles. So it was a great conversation. We didn't solve the problems of the world in that 12 minutes. I know, I'm sorry, Leighton. But, you know, some interesting themes came up in terms of, and maybe we can just sort of go around and share what sort of ideas came up in your rooms. So for example, in ours, one of the ideas came up was the importance of student identity and being responsive and respectful of student identity and just relationships with our students. And also not just student identity, but how we, the language we use around families and honoring the strengths and knowledge that children bring from their families and seeing that as a positive way, a positive thing, and honoring that knowledge and what they bring to thinking and learning about mathematics. Anyone else from that was breakout room 4. Anyone, Shay or Joy, want to jump in there? Okay.
I really liked how you shared about that triangle with the 3 corners of assessment and just needing all 3, the observations, the talk, and the product. That was hit home for me. Thank you.
Yeah. We talked about starting points and how, you know, using that ministry triangle in terms of rethinking letter grades is one way to sort of move that thinking beyond, you know, it needs to be a test or a quiz or written down, that there's lots of authentic ways to assess the doing and knowing of mathematics. Great.
I guess the only thing I'll add is just that big question of like, what do we count as assessment? I think that's a really good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah, we kept that swirled around a lot. So wondering what swirled around for you. Another breakout room want to share what they talked about?
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
Oh, Sarah, it's so nice to see you.
So in our breakout room, sorry, there's like so much noise in my school right now. In breakout room, we were talking a lot about the idea of teaching the skills, but at the same time moving towards a more competency approach to assessment, and that it's not about can they do, I don't know, multiplying with decimals tick, but it's more those competencies that I know that the ministry is trying to move towards and how to approach that. And I felt the struggle of some teachers feeling like they weren't really adequately trained or prepared how to do that. So that was just something that I was thinking about as they were sharing these challenges that they're facing.
Thanks, Alexis. Nice to see you.
Well, maybe I could go with them. We had Deb, Sarah, and Elke in our group, and after talking about our metaphors, the weaving cycles, and actually just using authentic Indigenous cultural ways, you know, as pedagogy, that was shared. But we talked about a term, maybe liking the term feedback much more than assessment. And I think we also talked about the importance of honoring the learner or the gifts that the learner, you know, brings to the setting, along with, you know, the culture and the community, and trying to give that more emphasis and de-emphasizing assessment as a product. So I welcome Deb, Elke, or Sarah to say a bit more if you wish.
I can add some things that kind of struck me as the importance of the learning as a process, which we talked about, the importance of thinking about the ways in which the land, looking at the land as leading learning, and then how do we use the opportunity to have those conversations and observations that are the feedback that are driving those learning experiences and allowing us to capture at points of time where learners are. And so we just talked about that being more holistic in our approaches around the way we do that rather than just events. I'm thinking, I think those are some important conversations that we talked about, and how that when we landed at the feedback piece, we know that culturally feedback is so important in the teaching component, and we see that and through story. And so those were kinds of conversations we thought would really allow us to stretch our thinking and how we are assessing and capturing that assessment with our learners. I hope I captured, because I tried to think about what the others had said.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
Just being mindful of the time, Cynthia, but wondering if there's someone from another group. We'll have maybe another minute of sharing or so.
I can share if that's okay, Sarah and Megan. Sarah Frost is actually in School District 5, where they're actually doing this they're starting the process already. They're pilot based on the core competencies, and the metaphor that they use is the eagle. She can probably speak to this better because I forgot. I was so fascinated. But they really can take the values and principles of the community and associate with what the kids are thinking and learning, and connect it with the land. And like it's about the land, but they connect it back to the questioning that they were learning. And the other metaphor was spirals from our two gardening teachers in another school. And it's really is that authentic, responsive to what the kids are interested in. So they're more portfolio assessment with parents commenting and giving input as well. Was there anything else, Sarah Frost and Megan and Sarah, that you want to add?
Just with thanks, Carol. The core competencies right now have been drafted into a different visual medium. So it's still communication, collaboration, thinking, and then the personal and social. And then the community has been working with a member in SD5 to merge the values of Tanaha, ways of learning and knowing in place, with each core competency. And so I just tried it out in math. It didn't go great, but that's okay. And basically, we, instead of letter grade, we evaluated them and they evaluated themselves using the eagle, because that's what represents thinking in the community. And then they used the core values from the Ministry of Education and merged them with Tanaha, ways of learning and knowing and values of that. So it's a new document that's available in SD5 as well as with my school, but it just came out. So we're talking about that.
It sounds like something that would be a good starting place for us as well. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. Just to wrap up in our group, just to add one thing we haven't talked about is relationships. And that was part of our conversation, is the time that's needed to build relationships with students in order to provide critical feedback that's not always easy to receive. So we have to help our students learn how to receive critical feedback that will help them grow. And it's hard to do that at the secondary level, where we might only see them once in a while, compared to the elementary level where we're teaching all the courses. So how to develop that kind of relationship so that we can have some very thoughtful assessment was something that came up in our discussion. So I hope that people had a chance to write a little bit in the Google Docs. If you or someone in your group was able to write a little bit of something in there. I see Leighton's done a bunch of hashtags. I'm not sure what those, but I think those are notes for us. Like a bullet point, maybe. I'm not sure. I understand what it is when you're tweeting, but I'm not sure what it is here. But thank you for that. And anything more from Carol or Janice while we transition to the wrap up? Okay, good. I just want to thank everybody for taking the opportunity to go into a breakout room and try to discuss some of this to get it started. It's not an easy thing that we asked you to do. So thank you for accepting the invitation and the risk to share some kind of unformed thoughts, or beginning, not unformed, but thoughts that you're beginning to form around this topic. Okay, so in wrapping up, I want to invite Joanne Yovanovich maybe to say a few words. And we have some thank yous and some note about some giveaways as well. So Joanne.
Hello to everyone for joining in on this. It's interesting to think about assessment in our group. We had some good ideas about relationship and first people's principles of learning, and also about who. One analogy was the basket being used as an image to talk about assessment, and who does the assessment, why do we do assessments, and as different people look at different things, they're all also assessing. So that was a very interesting sharing, Sylvia, and I hope that we did put some of your thoughts on the paper, but I don't know that we have that much of it. Certainly the importance of relationships and the time that relationships take to form is key to all of our work. And one of the other questions was that I had was, when you're assessing student work, like, what are you looking at? What are you looking for? And how have you had to change any questions or thoughts so that they fit with culturally responsive lessons? So I'd just like to say hello to everybody for partaking in these sessions, and a special hello to Cynthia, because Cynthia is like mouse woman in the background of many of these things lately that I feel like we don't often appreciate all of those pieces that you have going on in the background. So hello to you and to Joanne. Yeah, hello.
Thanks, Joanne. Well, that's a really nice way to wrap up our series. Four very important series that hopefully have helped you begin or continue beginning to reimagine mathematics education and the possibilities. I hope that for the next few months of school, you're able to try some of these ideas in your classroom, and we would love to hear what happens. Like Sarah was talking about the assessment not necessarily working, but we want to hear what doesn't matter if it's not working. Remember that whatever happens is a learning experience. And so it would be great to, in some ways, kind of keep in touch so that we can see and learn. Again, collectively, we're stronger and smarter together than we are by ourselves. So that's one reason of bringing everybody together for these kinds of events.